My beloved child. The message on your phone is shorter than you expected. I need to tell you what happened today. Nothing else. No explanation. No heart beside it. No attempt to soften what those words might do to you. Just one sentence from the person who once had so much to say to you, then somehow became the person who could leave entire weeks sitting between you without a single honest conversation. For a moment, you do not answer. You read it again. And something about the wording bothers you. They did not say, "I need to talk." They did not say, "Can I ask you something?" They said something happened. Today. Which means whatever they are about to tell you did not begin as a confession. They did not wake up planning to reopen the past. Something occurred that placed the past directly in front of them, and now they cannot pretend it is buried anymore. What you do not know is that, only a little while before sending that message, they had been standing in a room they had entered for an entirely ordinary reason. There was nothing romantic about the moment. No music. No dramatic reunion. No mysterious sign in the sky. Just a box. An old box that had been pushed behind several things nobody had touched in a long time. They almost ignored it. That is the strange part. If they had been in a hurry, if someone had called them from another room, if they had decided the mess could wait until another day, the box might have remained where it was. And this message would never have reached you. Inside were old receipts, photographs, papers that meant nothing anymore, a few things belonging to members of the family. Then they saw their own name. Written by your hand. They knew it immediately. Some people forget handwriting. They did not forget yours. The shape of certain letters was enough to take them somewhere they had spent a long time avoiding. Their fingers stopped moving. Underneath several folded papers was an envelope that had already been opened. Not torn violently. Opened carefully. That detail made the discomfort worse. Because the envelope had been addressed to them. And they had never seen it before. They stood there longer than they would later admit. At first, they tried to convince themselves there had to be an innocent explanation. Perhaps you had given it to someone and changed your mind. Perhaps it had been returned. Perhaps they had received it years ago and simply forgotten. But there are things the heart remembers precisely because they never happened. You had never handed them this letter. They would have remembered. Slowly, they pulled the pages from the envelope. And before they reached the second paragraph, they had to sit down. Because the letter was written during the period they had spent years believing you had already given up on them. That was the story they carried. It became easier over time to believe it. You left. You stopped fighting. You decided they were no longer worth the difficulty. That belief had protected them from asking a much harder question. What if you had tried to reach them, and they had been too hurt, too proud, or too influenced by everyone around them to recognize it? The letter answered part of that question. You had not written some desperate promise that everything between you was perfect. You had not begged. That surprised them. You had written about what had gone wrong. You admitted where you had failed them. You admitted that sometimes, when you felt ignored, you became distant instead of saying what you needed. You admitted that there were conversations where you had been more interested in protecting yourself than understanding them. Then came the sentence that made them put the pages down. You had written that you did not want the relationship back in the same form. You wanted one honest conversation. That was all. One conversation without family opinions in the room. Without friends carrying messages between you. Without assumptions. Without someone saying, if they cared, they would know. You had written that love should not require mind reading. And that if the two of you were going to end, you wanted the ending to belong to the two people who had actually lived the relationship. They read that sentence again. Then again. Because that was not what they had been told. At the time, they had been told you wanted nothing more to do with them. They had been told you were angry. That you had moved on quickly. That contacting you would only humiliate them. Some of those things had come from people who genuinely believed they were protecting your soulmate. Others had been assumptions repeated until they became facts. And your soulmate had accepted them because accepting them required less courage than reaching out and discovering the truth personally. That realization hurt more than the letter. The envelope had been hidden. But their own silence had not been forced upon them. That belonged to them. They picked up the pages again. Near the end, you had written something quieter. You said you understood if they were not ready. You said you would not chase them indefinitely. But you wanted them to know that your silence afterward should never be mistaken for lack of feeling. If they chose not to answer, you would respect it. And then you had written goodbye in a way that did not sound like someone leaving because they stopped loving. It sounded like someone leaving because they finally understood they could not remain outside a closed door forever. Your soulmate sat with that for a long time. Then another person entered the room. Someone close enough to recognize the envelope. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause people make when they are confused. The kind they make when something they hoped would stay hidden has just been discovered. Your soulmate looked up. What is this? The first answer came too quickly. I don't remember. Your soulmate did not raise their voice. That almost made the conversation more difficult. They simply held up the envelope. It has my name on it. Another pause. Then came a sigh. And slowly, painfully, the explanation began. The letter had arrived during a time when your soulmate was barely functioning. They were angry with you, angry with themselves, uncertain about everything. People around them had watched the relationship hurt both of you. They had watched your soulmate lose sleep, change plans, withdraw from people, and then defend you whenever anyone criticized you. Someone decided enough was enough. They opened the letter. They read it. And they made a choice that was never theirs to make. They kept it. At first your soulmate could barely understand what they were hearing. You read this? Yes. And you never gave it to me? I thought I was helping you. Those words changed the room. Because sometimes harm does not arrive looking cruel. Sometimes it arrives convinced that it knows what is best. The person tried to explain. You were finally starting to move forward. I wasn't moving forward. You were getting better. I was pretending. We were afraid you would go back. That was my decision. The answer came sharper that time. Silence followed. And in that silence, your soulmate felt several emotions colliding at once. Anger at the letter being hidden. Grief over what might have happened if they had read it. Embarrassment because part of them wanted to place everything on this one discovery. It would have been convenient. They could have told themselves the entire relationship had been destroyed by someone else. But they knew that was not true. The letter explained one missing piece. It did not excuse everything that happened afterward. Nobody had forced them to ignore the times your name came up and they pretended not to care. Nobody had forced them to delete the message they almost sent months later. Nobody had forced them to turn pride into a principle. They remembered that message now. They had written, "Can we talk?" 3 words. They stared at them for almost an hour. Then deleted them before sending. At the time they told themselves they were preserving their dignity. Now, holding your old letter, they wondered if dignity had simply been the respectable name they gave their fear. That thought followed them out of the room. They took the letter with them. The person who had hidden it apologized. Not perfectly. There was still defensiveness in the apology. "I really believed I was protecting you." Your soulmate looked at them and said something they themselves had needed years to understand. "You were allowed to warn me. You were allowed to disagree. You were not allowed to decide for me." Then they left before anger turned the conversation into something uglier. For a while, they sat alone with your words. The strangest thing was that the letter did not make them imagine some perfect alternate life where nothing went wrong. They knew better than that now. Even if they had received it, the two of you still had problems. There were patterns between you that love alone had not fixed. There were moments when you both expected tenderness while offering defensiveness. Moments when one of you wanted reassurance and the other heard accusation. Moments when a small misunderstanding became a larger wound because neither person wanted to be the first to admit they were frightened. Receiving the letter would not have magically healed all of that. But it might have given both of you something you never received. The truth. A chance to choose with the same information. And losing that chance disturbed them deeply. That is when another memory returned. It was one they had buried because, until today, it had never made sense. Shortly before the distance between you became permanent, you had looked at them differently during one of your final conversations. You seemed as if you were waiting for them to mention something. At one point you asked, quietly, "Is there anything you want to say to me?" They remember shrugging. "What do you want me to say?" Your expression changed. Only slightly. Then you answered, "Nothing." Forget it. For years, they remembered that moment as proof that you were emotionally leaving. Today they understood it differently. Perhaps you had been wondering whether they received the letter. Perhaps you had been waiting to see if they would acknowledge it without you having to expose yourself twice. And when they said nothing, you assumed they had read everything you wrote and still chosen silence. Imagine what that meant from your side. You believed they knew. They believed you had never tried. Two people walking away from the same relationship carrying opposite versions of the same silence. That was the moment your soulmate reached for their phone. They opened your conversation. Your name was still there. So was the history. Not all of it. Some messages had been deleted during angry nights when they were trying to prove to themselves that removing words could remove attachment. But enough remained to remind them how the two of you used to speak before every sentence began carrying the weight of what was not being said. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. They typed. "I found something." Deleted it. Then. "There's something you need to know." Deleted that too. Both sounded like beginnings that protected them from the emotional reality of what had happened. So they placed the phone down, picked it up again, and finally wrote, "I need to tell you what happened today." That is the message in front of you now. And perhaps your first instinct is to protect yourself. Because there was a time when those words would have made your whole body alert with hope. You would have answered immediately. You would have rearranged your night, ignored your own exhaustion, and made space for whatever they needed to say. But you are not standing in that version of yourself anymore. Something changed after waiting for explanations that never came. You learned that loving someone did not require remaining permanently available to their uncertainty. So you do not rush. Eventually, you type. What happened? They see it almost immediately. The typing indicator appears. Disappears. Appears again. Then stops. A minute passes. The next message is longer. I found a letter from you. An old one. I never received it. Someone in my family opened it and kept it from me. Your breath catches. Not because you have forgotten the letter. Because you remember it too well. You remember rewriting it. Removing accusations. Adding things you were afraid to admit. You remember wondering whether sending it made you weak. You remember deciding you would rather risk looking foolish than spend years wondering whether honesty could have changed something. And then nothing came back. No response. Not even anger. For a long time, you believed that silence was the response. You had interpreted it as a decision. Now, years of meaning shift inside one small message. Your soulmate continues. I read it today. Then. I need you to know I had no idea. There is a part of you that wants to answer immediately. Another part does not know whether to feel relieved or furious. Because discovering why someone did not respond does not return the version of you who waited for that response. An explanation can repair the truth. It cannot refund time. Perhaps your soulmate understands this because their next message does not ask for anything. I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive me. A pause. And I'm not blaming everything on what they did. Then the message that finally sounds different from the person you remember. I still made choices after that. I could have reached out. There were times I wanted to, and I didn't. I let what other people said become easier to believe than asking you directly. That part is mine. You stare at the words. This is the conversation you once wanted. Yet it has arrived so late that you no longer know what you want it to become. And perhaps that is the most human part of all. Sometimes the truth does not arrive in time to restore what existed. Sometimes it arrives simply because two people deserve to stop living inside a misunderstanding. You finally ask the question that stayed with you longer than you ever admitted. Why did they hide it? The answer takes longer. Because they thought loving you was destroying me. That hurts. Then another message arrives. But what they didn't understand was that losing you didn't fix me either. You read that twice. Not because it is a declaration. Because it is not. They are not promising some perfect reunion. They are not claiming they have spent every day waiting for you. They are acknowledging something less dramatic and more honest. Distance had consequences too. The person who hid the letter had seen their pain while they were with you and assumed removing you would remove the pain. Nobody considered that some of the pain came from the way your soulmate loved. The avoidance. The defensiveness. The habit of going silent whenever the relationship required vulnerability. Those patterns did not disappear after you. They followed them. Into friendships. Into other connections. Into moments when someone would ask, "What's wrong?" and they would automatically answer, "Nothing." Today, reading your letter, they saw the pattern clearly. You had once been standing inside it with them. But you had not created all of it. Your phone lights again. There's something else. For the first time since the conversation began, you feel afraid of what comes next. I remembered the last time you asked me if I had anything to say. Your chest tightens. They remember. I thought you were trying to start another argument. Now I think you were waiting for me to mention the letter. You type only one word. Yes. The answer comes quickly. I'm sorry. You do not respond. So they continue. I know that doesn't repair it. Another pause. I just need you to know that when I said nothing that day, I wasn't rejecting what you wrote. I had never seen it. Something inside you becomes quieter. Not healed. Not restored. Just quieter. Because for so long, one of the most painful memories you carried was not the breakup itself. It was believing you had finally told the complete truth and they had considered your heart unworthy of an answer. Now you know that is not what happened. Your vulnerability did not reach them. It was intercepted by fear, by interference, by people making decisions they thought were protective. And then the distance was strengthened by the mistakes both of you made afterward. There is no single villain in the story. That makes it harder. And somehow more freeing. Because you no longer need to rewrite yourself as foolish for having tried. You did try. They simply never knew. Your soulmate sends one final message. If you don't want to reopen anything, I'll respect that. I'm not asking you to become who you were back then. I just didn't want another day to pass with you believing I read that letter and ignored you. This time, they stop typing. No pressure follows. No dramatic promise. No demand for forgiveness. The decision is finally where it should have been from the beginning. Between the two of you. And perhaps you answer. Perhaps you do not answer tonight. Perhaps you say, "Thank you for telling me." Perhaps you ask for a conversation. Perhaps you realize that hearing the truth has brought peace without bringing back the relationship. Or perhaps, beneath everything that happened, there is still something worth speaking about. Not because fate guarantees an ending, but because honesty has finally entered a place where assumptions once made every decision. Whatever you choose, one thing has changed. The silence no longer means what you thought it meant. That old unanswered letter was not proof that your love had been dismissed. Their absence was not as simple as indifference. And their discovery today does not erase the pain, but it gives the past its missing piece. Your soulmate sits with the phone nearby, not knowing what you will decide. For once, they are not trying to control the outcome. They have spent too much time understanding love through fear, fear of losing you, fear of needing you, fear of looking foolish, fear of choosing against the people around them. Today forced them to see what that fear cost. Not merely a relationship. A truthful ending. A truthful choice. A conversation two people should have been allowed to have. And now, much later than either of you would have chosen, that conversation is standing at the door again. Not demanding entrance. Simply waiting. Because sometimes the most important thing that happens between two people is not that they find their way back to each other. Sometimes it is that the truth finally finds its way to both of them. And after all this time, whatever happens next will no longer be decided by a hidden letter, someone else's fear, or a silence neither of you understood. This time, the choice will belong to you.